there. It's good to be with you today. I'm not sure what time of the day that you're watching this is, but it's morning here in Belfast, and I'm delighted and honoured to be part of this important event. My name is David Mitchell, and I am an assistant professor at Trinity College Dublin, but based in Belfast. Trinity College Dublin is the leading university in the Republic of Ireland, but I work at their small campus in Northern Ireland, where we teach a Master's in Conflict Resolution. So what I do day to day is I talk to students from all over the world who come to Northern Ireland to study the peace process here. And that's what I'm talking to you about today. I want to discuss the origins of the conflict in Northern Ireland, then try to explain the peace process. The Northern Ireland peace process is one of the most well known in the world because it is seen as one of the most successful. And many people have suggested that it may have insights and lessons for other places, for other conflicts. And that's one of my own research areas, this whole area of lessons. And it's quite complicated. There's been a lot written and said about the global implications, the possible global implications of the Northern Ireland case, but that's what I want to talk about today. So this is what we're going to look at. Firstly, I'll try to explain the causes of the conflict. Then I'll talk about the peace process, and particularly the 1998 agreement, which was the high point of the peace process, an agreement which is still in place today, although it has experienced many problems. And I'll talk about those as well, the problems of implementing peace since 1998, also the successes that we've had. And then lastly, I'll talk about this big issue of what lessons may exist for other places. Now, what is the conflict all about? Well, it can be summed up in this question. Should the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland stay in the United Kingdom, or should it become part of a united Irish state? And that has been the question at the heart of the conflict, really, for the last 100 years. And it is still the question at the heart of the conflict, although thankfully the question has now taken on a non-violent form. People are fighting about this through politics rather than weapons. Now, usually most historians will trace the origin of the conflict to the 1600s. Britain has been involved in Ireland in different ways really for the last 1,000 years, but it is usually the 1600s which are seen as the starting point of the modern conflict. And that's because in the early 1600s, something called the plantations happened. And this was a settler colonial project of the English monarchy designed to extend its control over Ireland by sending over thousands of Scottish and English settlers to live in Ireland. England was worried about attack from France and Spain coming in through Ireland, and so it wanted greater control over the island. And perhaps the most significant thing about the settlers was not only that they were loyal to the English monarchy, but also that they were Protestant. They were religiously different to the native Irish. This was happening shortly after the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And the fact that the settlers were religiously different meant that the differences between the settlers and the natives really endured quite clearly. Religious difference meant that there was very little intermarriage, for example, and the Protestant settlers tended to stay in their own areas, and they were particularly concentrated in the northeast, really where I'm sitting today, around Belfast and counties Antrim and Down. Now, if we skip forward a couple of hundred years till the early 20th century, throughout that whole period, Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. The whole of the island was part of the United Kingdom. But in the late 1800s, an Irish nationalist movement began to grow, really like nationalist movements all over Europe gathered in strength. And the Irish nationalist movement wanted what was called Home Rule. And this was a type of autonomy within the United Kingdom. They wanted a local parliament, not necessarily full independent statehood. Now, the Protestants in the north were very worried about the possibility of Home Rule and being taken out of the UK, as they saw it, because they thought that would be bad for their religious liberties as Protestants. They thought it would be bad for their political rights as part of the United Kingdom. And they also thought it would be quite bad for them economically. And this was because the Northeast was much more industrialized than the rest of the island. So Belfast and the area around it had very close economic links with cities in Scotland and the north of England, and Belfast was part of this great British Empire, which was very good for business, really. And Unionists didn't want to be taken out of all this and put into a small Irish state. And so the Unionists, as they became called, the Protestants in the north, started to campaign against Home Rule. And to make a long story short, we then have two opposing nationalist movements in Ireland. One in the northeast, a pro-British Unionist movement, and one centred on Dublin, a pro-Irish separatist movement. And there was a possibility that this would all lead to civil war. And to avoid this, the British partitioned Ireland. They created something called Northern Ireland, which was a new region that would stay in the United Kingdom. It was made up of these 6 northeast counties on the island, and the other 26 counties became autonomous, and it was called the Irish Free State. It was not yet a full independent state, but it did have its own parliament and much more independence than previously. Now, the British probably thought that they were solving the problem by separating the two groups on the island. Irish nationalists thought this was terrible. They thought this was a colonial crime which unnaturally split the island, really in order for Britain to retain power in the northeast. The Unionists actually didn't want partition either. They wanted the whole of the island to stay in the UK. However, they gradually accepted partition because it did mean that they, in the northeast, could stay in the United Kingdom. Now, unfortunately, partition did not really solve the basic problem because partition created new majorities and minorities. So firstly, many Protestants, pro-British Protestants, were left outside of Northern Ireland, particularly in the northern county of Donegal, Monaghan and Cavan, and many other places. They were left in this new independent Irish political entity against their will. And at the same time, thousands and thousands of Catholics, Roman Catholic, pro-Irish people were left inside this new Northern Ireland. In fact, around 1/3 of the people in the new Northern Ireland were pro-Irish, nationalist, Roman Catholic, and did not identify with this new Irish state. New Northern Ireland, sorry. And so what happened after partition was that really the Unionists in the north, who run their parliament from this place, Stormont, which is just about 3 miles from me here in Belfast, and that was the first Unionist leader, Edward Carson, a big statue which is outside the building. The Unionists ran their new state from there, and really they ran it as a one-party state, because the Unionists were extremely fearful and threatened. They felt very vulnerable, and they felt that the Irish militants wanted to destroy their Northern Ireland, and so they ran quite a repressive regime during the middle of the 20th century. And the Protestants who were in control were very suspicious of the Catholic minority. And Catholics were really treated like second-class citizens. So they found it very difficult to get housing. They found it difficult to get jobs in the civil service or in big Protestant-run businesses. The voting system was created to make sure that Catholics could not really ever get into power. So there was a majority parliamentary system like Westminster, where the one biggest party really takes control and takes government, and that means that the smaller nationalist party could never be part of the government. So nationalist Catholics were excluded from the government. And so really during the 20th century we have a kind of Cold War between the North and the South. Very little overt violence, but a lot of suspicion, very little contact between the northern state, which was very pro-British and Protestant, and the southern state, which was increasingly anti-British, quite strongly Roman Catholic in many of its laws, and that situation really persisted until the 1960s. And what happened then was that a new Catholic middle class in the north really got fed up with their second-class status, and they started to go out on civil rights marches similar to this kind of civil rights marches that were going on in parts of Europe and the United States at the time. And really, the Unionist state was quite fearful of these civil rights marches. They were worried that this was really an attempt to overthrow their regime, and there was quite a strong state backlash against the civil rights protests. There was a lot of street violence. There was a lot of displacement, with Catholics in Protestant areas being forced out of their homes, and vice versa. And really a very tense and difficult situation emerged. And into that situation, organized paramilitary groups became active. And this is really where the modern conflict known as the Troubles begins. So the Troubles really lasted for 30 years. Of course, nobody expected them to last for 30 years. Everyone thought it was just a brief emergency situation, really, in the early 70s, but they went on year after year. And there were three main combatant groups, three main actors in the Troubles. The most important was the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and it was a militant pro-Irish Republican or nationalist. We can use both those terms. Usually Republican is how they're described. Irish Republican group, and its aim was to force the British out of Ireland, to end the existence of Northern Ireland. And in 1972, the situation got so bad that the British government shut down the Unionist Parliament in Belfast and took direct control over Northern Ireland. And they also sent in the British Army to try and pacify the situation. However, the British Army initially was trying to keep the peace, but it soon got dragged into the conflict. It started to look like an occupying army, and a huge amount of conflict then began between the IRA and the British Army, and also the police force, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which also represented the state, the British state in Northern Ireland. We then have Unionist or Protestant paramilitaries formed. The UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force, and the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, were the two main Protestant paramilitaries, and they really fought back against the IRA and also killed many innocent Catholics. And so this is the triangular structure. You've got the security forces, and then the IRA, and then the loyalist paramilitaries, who are all in combat. And throughout this period of 30 years, there were many political initiatives, many rounds of talks, periods of negotiation, trying to find a new way to govern Northern Ireland that everyone could be happy with. But all of them failed, and the violence really dragged on and on and on. Now, what was the impact of all of this? Well, over the 30 years, 3,635 people were killed, most of them civilians, and it's been estimated that there were 500,000 victims. That is, people who were killed, injured, traumatized, displaced or otherwise affected by the conflict. And those are not huge numbers compared to many other conflicts, but compared to the small population of Northern Ireland of 1.7 million, that's a huge proportion of the population affected. And really everybody in the country, everybody in the north knew somebody who was directly affected. Now, in the 1980s, coming into the 1990s, it really seemed like quite a hopeless situation. People could not see a way out of the conflict. However, a way out did emerge, and the peace process gradually took root. Now, the origins of the peace process are extremely complex, and they're still being discussed by historians today, but I simplify it into these three factors. The most important factor in the emergence of a negotiation process, a peace process, was the close cooperation of the British and Irish governments. In the 1980s, Britain and Ireland both realised that it was in their interests to end the violence. It was not only extremely damaging to human beings, but it also was bad for the international reputations of the UK and Ireland. And the UK and Ireland signed an agreement in 1985 called the Anglo-Irish Agreement. And in this agreement, they agreed to cooperate to try and find a solution to the conflict. At the same time, the European Union was getting closer, cooperation was intensifying, and the fact that the UK and Republic of Ireland were both members of the European Union is widely seen by historians as being extremely beneficial to their relationship, because it facilitated contact and cooperation between Irish and British politicians and civil servants, and made it much easier for the two states to cooperate to try and find a peaceful solution. The second factor is military stalemate. It was clear by the 1980s that the IRA were not going to force the British state out of Northern Ireland. They could keep attacking for years and years and years, but they would never defeat the British Army. But the British Army also knew that it could keep fighting back against the IRA and stopping the IRA attacks, but would never fully defeat the IRA. And so on both sides, there was a realization that this was really a stalemate that could go on forever, and that therefore a political solution was preferable to this continuing stalemate. And then the third factor, I think, is also important. There was a huge amount of reconciliation, peace-building work happening on the ground among ordinary people. And this was done by churches, by faith groups, by trade unions, by women's groups, by sporting organizations, all kinds of civil society initiatives trying to bring people together and change people's attitudes. And I think this was also an important factor in the emergence of the peace process. Talks were initiated in 1996, and after 2 years they did come to a conclusion. They produced the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, or Belfast Agreement as it is sometimes called. And this is a picture of George Mitchell in the center, who was the American senator who was the chair of the talks. On his right is Bertie Ahern, the Irish Taoiseach, as he's called, Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland, and then Tony Blair, also in the picture, the British Prime Minister. Now, what was in the Good Friday Agreement? Well, we can sum it up in 2 points. On the one hand, Northern Ireland would stay in the United Kingdom as long as a majority of people wanted it to. This was called the principle of consent. And this was a big victory for unionists because all sides, including nationalists and the Irish state, accepted the democratic legitimacy of Northern Ireland, that it should rest on the will of the majority within Northern Ireland. However, the trade-off for this was that Northern Ireland would have to change. It would have to be reformed to become much more equal and inclusive, especially of a nationalist Irish identity. And that was really the big victory for Irish nationalists. So that was the basic bargain. The agreement created new political institutions. There were 3 aspects of the talks, which were called strands. Strand 1, Strand 2, and Strand 3. And the 3 strands were really the idea of John Hume, the leader of the moderate Irish Nationalist Party, called the Social Democratic and Labour Party. And he felt that a solution to the conflict had to reflect the complexity of the conflict. He argued that it wasn't just about relationships within Northern Ireland, but the conflict was also about relations between the North and South of Ireland and between the UK and Republic of Ireland. So there were these 3 dimensions, and therefore John Hume argued that we needed 3 new types of political institutions to try and improve the 3 sets of relationships. So in Strand 1, relationships would be improved through a power-sharing assembly in which unionists and nationalists would both have the right to be part of government. So there would not be the kind of exclusion that had happened before 1972. And there were new equality and human rights commissions created in order to protect people's rights. Strand 2, we have a new institution linking the North of Ireland and the South of Ireland called the North-South Ministerial Council. And this was a body created to try and encourage cross-border practical cooperation on a variety of issues such as tourism, fisheries, agriculture, waterways, economic investment, and so on. And then thirdly, we have Strand 3, which was really designed to improve relationships and contact between the different parts of the 2 islands, Britain and Ireland. And this is a place where not only the UK government and Irish government get together, but also the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly as well, this British-Irish Council, and then the Intergovernmental Conference as well, which linked London and Dublin. And these three sets of institutions were interlocking and interdependent. Those are the words in the agreement. So you couldn't have one strand without the others all operating at the same time. Now, that was the theory, but we've had many challenges putting this into practice since then, and I will quickly go through these implementation challenges. And just reading this now, all of these are still with us today. The only one that is resolved is the first one. The other problems are still ongoing. So the biggest problem initially after the agreement was getting rid of paramilitary weapons. The IRA still had a huge arsenal of guns and bombs, and the IRA was linked to the Sinn Féin party, the Irish Republican Party, and so Unionists did not want to share power in government with Sinn Féin until the IRA destroyed its weapons. So it became a major issue of trust after the agreement. The IRA did not want to give up its weapons because it did not want to look like it was surrendering. And so there was an impasse, a standoff for many years, and power sharing was not implemented. However, the IRA did destroy its weapons, or decommission its weapons, as it was called, in 2005, really because it was under a lot of pressure from the American government and the Irish government as well. And Sinn Féin knew that if it wanted to keep winning votes and becoming a bigger and bigger political party, it would have to get rid of these IRA weapons. And so that, thankfully, that is a big success of the peace process. Nobody thinks that every single gun was destroyed. However, it is widely accepted that the main arsenals of the IRA were destroyed, and some of the loyalist groups decommissioned their weapons a few years later, although the loyalist groups are less politically significant because they don't have political parties linked to them. We have this other ongoing issue of groups which violently oppose the peace process. So we have what are called dissident Republicans. These are people who broke away from the mainstream Sinn Féin and IRA in the 1990s because they did not agree with the negotiation, the peace process strategy of Sinn Féin. And they formed various armed groups which continue to attack. And they tend to attack police officers. They've killed police officers, soldiers, and prison officers as well. Just a few weeks ago, they tried to kill a very senior police officer. Thankfully, he survived, but was seriously injured. But these groups are still active. And this is one of their murals in West Belfast, stating that resistance is not terrorism, in their view. They are quite small, these groups. They don't have much political support. They maybe only involve a few hundred people, but they still can create a lot of damage and problems, especially for the police. Another problem we have is our failure to resolve the past. we have not had a comprehensive transitional justice process. There have been attempts to create mechanisms, something like a truth commission, different ways of dealing with the past have been proposed, but none have been implemented. Currently, the British government is planning to enact a sort of amnesty for Troubles-related crimes, which means that there will be no more prosecutions or trials or inquests for crimes carried out during the conflict. And people in Northern Ireland are very angry about this. So it remains a very contested issue. And really the problem is that there were no winners and losers in the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement did not say who was good and who was bad. It did not say who caused the conflict. It did not allocate blame. And therefore, dealing with the past is extremely difficult because both sides continue to feel that they were justified and that they were right. We've had many contests over cultural expression as well. Again, the agreement did not resolve this issue. It did not say whether, for example, the British flag should be flown from public buildings, or no flag, or the British and Irish flags together. Both Unionists and Nationalists have been asserting their cultural identity. There have been clashes and arguments over these parades by the Orange Order, which is a Protestant cultural organisation, but which many Catholics and Nationalists find offensive. And also arguments over the Irish language. Nationalists want to promote the Irish language, which is the sort of indigenous language of the island, which is not spoken widely today, but it has a huge cultural significance, symbolic significance for Irish nationalists. But Unionists oppose promotion of the Irish language because they feel it threatens their own British identity. So many and ongoing contests over cultural expression and symbols. We also have a continuing divided society. Unionists and Nationalists continue to live in separate areas. They socialize separately. They go to different churches, obviously. They sometimes play different sports. They read different newspapers. They live in separate worlds to a great extent. And that really is something that continues by itself. You can see here in the picture a peace wall, so-called peace wall, which separates parts of West Belfast. So there's still a lot of tension between some of these areas, and we still have paramilitaries in existence. The top picture is a paramilitary mural in East Belfast. The paramilitaries in Unionist working class areas continue as a type of mafia who control the drug trades, control areas, often are like a police force, a brutal police force who punish and beat up and shoot people they don't like. And it really is a big problem that these organizations continue to exist even 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement. And another big and very unexpected problem for the peace process has been Brexit, the decision of the UK to leave the European Union. Now this is something I could talk about all day, and it gets very complicated, but really, why is Brexit a problem? Well, the Good Friday Agreement tried to take borders and national identities out of everyday politics. And the Good Friday Agreement wanted people just to think about practical issues and trying to govern together in Northern Ireland. But really, Brexit has brought back national identity into everyday politics, because really the Northern Ireland voted to stay in the EU. However, the UK overall voted to leave the European Union. So people in Northern Ireland are very unhappy that they've been taken out of the EU against their will. And also, the Brexit means there has to be a border somewhere. There has to be trade checks somewhere, because the UK will no longer be part of the EU single market. And initially it looked like the border would be in the island of Ireland, and people were very angry that there might be trade checks on cars and goods going, up and down the island between the north and the south. And also, and to solve that, the British government decided to put the border in the Irish Sea. So now there are trade checks on goods coming from Britain into Northern Ireland. And this has made unionists extremely angry. This is one of their posters complaining about what has happened. And we have had no government now for the last year, because unionists are protesting about this new border in the Irish Sea. But really, Brexit is something that has upset the Good Friday Agreement and has polarized opinion again. Now, moving to this final and key question of what are the lessons for other conflicts. Since 1998, there has been so much discussion about this in political speeches by politicians and civil servants who were involved in the talks, memoirs of such people, many academic conferences and publications, many of which I have been involved in, numerous media debates and discussion, and also a huge number of study trips which have come to Northern Ireland to try and learn from the experience here. And what's interesting, I think, is that this activity in a sense follows on from the activity of South Africa during the 1990s. So the South Africa experienced what was seen as a miraculous transition to democracy without the bloodshed that many people expected, and this was partly due to the leadership of Nelson Mandela, of course. And Northern Irish politicians visited South Africa twice in the 1990s, in 1994 and in 1997. And there they met with Mandela and many other people from all sides, sharing their experiences of the South African transition. And many of those Northern Irish politicians have said since then that those visits were quite transformative in their thinking and really encouraged and motivated them to pursue a peaceful settlement in Northern Ireland. And so now Northern Ireland is doing that for other places. The picture on the left is the former president of Colombia, President Santos, visiting Northern Ireland in 2016 and meeting Unionist and Nationalist leaders. And that was because Santos himself drew a lot of inspiration from Northern Ireland when he was pursuing his peace process with the FARC guerrillas, which led to the peace agreement in Colombia in 2016. Now, before we get to the actual lessons, I think we need to talk about how Northern Ireland is similar or different to other conflicts. Because that is going to have implications for whether there might be transferable lessons. So first of all, the differences. The Northern Ireland conflict was not a civil war. It was a conflict within a region of what was a developed and strong, stable state, the United Kingdom. And there was no complete state collapse like in other places. So public services continued. The police continued their normal work. There was generally the rule of law in place. The conflict also took place in a stable regional context of Western Europe. So many conflicts have interfering neighbours who support one or other sides in many civil conflicts, but that didn't really happen in Northern Ireland, and the European Union was happy to support the peace process. It did not have any interest in continuing the conflict. There were also relatively low numbers of casualties and combatants compared to many other places, and there was no United Nations involvement like so many other peace processes either. So all these factors set Northern Ireland apart from many other conflicts. However, there are many similarities. Although the conflict was unusual in Western Europe, it was not unusual in a global context. There were conflicts like Northern Ireland happening all over the world, especially in post-colonial contexts. And those conflicts were about contested borders, self-determination, the political recognition and inclusion of minorities, and also all these psychological dimensions like enmity, grievance, negative images of another group, and so on. So Northern Ireland did share many themes with other conflicts, all these general themes. Now, noticing the similarities and differences doesn't immediately tell us what the lessons might be. However, it is important to keep the similarities and differences in mind when thinking about the lessons. Now, in my own research on the lessons, I have suggested that there are 3 categories of lessons. So, looking at all these political speeches, memoirs, media debates, and so on that have discussed the lessons, I think we can see 3 different types of lessons among them. And this really is a way to help us organize what people have said about the topic. Firstly, what we may call technical lessons. And this is This is really where people have suggested that certain aspects of the peace process, certain techniques or mechanisms or institutions or rules or procedures that were used in Northern Ireland might be applicable elsewhere. And so many of these have been suggested as being potentially relevant for other places, such as the power sharing institutions, the use of international independent commissions to deal with difficult issues like weapons disarmament and police reform, the public referendum, which was held to endorse the agreement, and many other features of the peace process. Now, the problem with technical lessons is the fact that all contexts are different. And I think it is not that techniques bring parties together. It is the fact that parties are coming together and then agree to the establishment of these techniques and mechanisms. So the techniques were the result of the parties coming together rather than the cause of the parties coming together. And therefore we need to look at deeper underlying dynamics as to why the peace process in Northern Ireland happened and why a peace process works anywhere, and some of those dynamics I discussed earlier. However, I don't think that means that it is a waste of time to study the techniques used in Northern Ireland, because these may provide inspiration for other people in other conflicts to design their own unique techniques that will work for them. So even if they are not exportable in a very direct way, it is still interesting for people from other conflicts to consider what happened in Northern Ireland, think about why it worked and whether it would work for them, or what would work for them. Secondly, we have what might be called political lessons. And this is where Northern Ireland is used as a sort of analogy or example in the argumentation of political actors elsewhere. So, for example, I mentioned Colombia, which where Santos loved to talk about Northern Ireland, saying that they could do something like Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has been talked a lot about in the Israel-Palestine situation by different sides, and different sides have taken different lessons from the Northern Irish experience. In Spain, in the Basque country, Basque nationalists, they modeled their own transition to peace very much on the transition of the IRA and Sinn Féin to peaceful means. And Northern Ireland was talked a lot about in the Basque country. And so Northern Ireland has been drawn into these other situations as an example, as a place for different types, as suggesting different types of lesson for different actors in other places. Now again, this is quite a complicated thing to understand, because like we've just said, all contexts are different, but also, you know, actors in Northern Ireland do not agree on what really happened and why it happened in Northern Ireland, and therefore one may wonder how people in other contexts could really understand what the lesson might be for them, and people in other contexts may pick up the wrong conclusion from Northern Ireland. Having said that, analogies can still be helpful. It can be useful for people in other conflicts to be able to refer to what is seen as a successful case as a way of promoting their own peace process. So South Africa, as I said, was useful like that in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland was useful like that in Colombia, in the Basque Country, and some other places. So these broad political lessons can be useful, even if they are also open to misuse. And then the third type of lesson I think we can call psychological lessons. And this is when people from other contexts draw psychological insights from Northern Ireland. When they come here, when they meet with people, when they talk, when they see physically, and when they experience being in Northern Ireland, they may draw inspiration and motivation to pursue their own peace process. So they're not getting direct technical or political advice or guidance, but it's a much more general change of mindset which may come from studying Northern Ireland. And this is what motivates the many conflict resolution organizations who bring people from other conflicts to Northern Ireland on study trips to meet people and to experience the context here. Perhaps the most important lesson of Northern Ireland is that a hopeless situation can be transformed. I think people in all conflicts, and I'm sure this is the same in Korea, people tend to think that their own conflict and context is the worst in the world, is the most serious, is the hardest to resolve, that outsiders can't possibly understand it. And that's certainly what people in Northern Ireland thought. And yet Northern Ireland is evidence that these hopeless situations are not necessarily hopeless, that they can be transformed. People can be inspired by individual stories of political leaders who have experienced the peace process, who have perhaps undergone personal change. And I think also studying Northern Ireland is a great way to demonstrate what a peace process can be like. That it's extremely long, that it's difficult, that it always leads to an imperfect peace. No peace process can lead to perfect peace. But it can also yield real rewards for ordinary people. So in conclusion, as I've said, the Northern Ireland peace process has been full of setbacks and crises, but is also remarkably resilient. And just last month, in April, because I'm talking in May, we had the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And many events looking back and also looking forward. There is no doubt that everyday life is much better for most people, not for everyone perhaps. People who still suffer as a result of the conflict, who have not got justice. But for most people, everyday life is better. And regarding lessons, ultimately, we in Northern Ireland cannot tell other people around the world what the lessons are or should be. It is for people who come to Northern Ireland to decide what the lessons are for them. Because people will come to different conclusions and will draw different insights that are relevant to them. But as I've said, to summarize the three different areas, technical, political, and psychological lessons, the technical lessons can be useful because it might help people design their own conflict resolution techniques. Northern Ireland might provide a useful analogy as well for other conflicts where they are trying to promote a peace process. And finally, the psychological lessons, I think meeting and sharing with people from Northern Ireland might help people from other conflicts understand the nature of a peace process and gain motivation and insight to pursue their own processes. And that's where I end. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you well for the rest of the conference. Thank you. Hello again. I hope everybody enjoyed my talk and it was clear and made sense. So I've been given some questions, 3 very good questions, and I'm just going to try and offer some answers to them. So the first question is about what is being done by government and civil society to address many of the problems that remain in Northern Ireland, which of course is a very good and important question. And I think one of the problems we have here is that we have not had stable government for many years. It wasn't stable between 1998 and 2007. Then we did have 10 years of power sharing government, but it collapsed in 2017 until 2020, and then it collapsed again last year in 2022, each time over different arguments between the two main unionist and nationalist parties. Currently, the Unionist Party, the Democratic Unionist Party, it left government in protest about Brexit and the new border in the Irish Sea, which has been created. But really, because we have not had that sustained period of government with everybody working together, working in the same direction, I think there has been a lack of attention paid to addressing many of the remaining issues, especially around reconciliation, integration, breaking down barriers, and also all of those policing and security issues such as paramilitaries and organised crime. The police have failed really to get rid of that problem. And again, the lack of stable government, I think, has impacted on policing taking decisive action on those issues. There was a strategy, a government strategy created in 2013 for reconciliation, and that document was called Together Building a United Community. It had a range of targets, and it also funded lots of good work happening on the ground, lots of civil society organisations running cross-community events, youth camps, and so on. The document also had a target to take down all of the peace walls that divide communities by 2023. And all those walls are still there this year. So unfortunately, that target to bring down the peace walls has been completely missed. Having said that, while there has been
failings of government. Lots of civil society groups are working every day in communities to try and build better relationships, promote understanding, tackle social exclusion and deprivation, and so on. The second question is about Brexit, the impact of Brexit, changes resulting from Brexit, and also how peace building can remain resilient in the face of a geopolitical shock like this. Again, that's a big question, a very good question. I don't think Brexit has had any positive effect, probably anywhere, but certainly it has not had a positive effect in Ireland or Northern Ireland. It has polarized identities. It has made people think more about their own national identity. Am I British? Am I Irish? And I think that's unfortunate because really the Good Friday Agreement was trying to get people to stop thinking in those binary ways about identity, either or identities, and trying to create a shared Northern Irish identity and, in a sense, a European identity supported that sharing. Because it was shared between all sides of the community here. But unfortunately, that European option, that European identity option has been taken away. And so people are somewhat more polarized. And now we have this problem of the border in the Irish Sea. Thankfully, the land border, which was threatened by Brexit, bringing back a hard border to the island of Ireland with security and trade checks, that was avoided. But now we have trade checks between Britain and Northern Ireland, which unionists are not happy about. So we are waiting to see how that will finish up that issue. Hopefully, unionists will come back into government. But I mean, I think there are no real ways for any peace process to cope with any eventuality. There will always be unexpected things. But I think, to be optimistic for a moment, I would say that Brexit perhaps has not been as bad as we thought it might be. And that's because the Irish government and the British government and the European Union all understood the importance of protecting stability in Northern Ireland. And therefore, they have worked hard to try and minimize the disruption from Brexit, even though it cannot be minimized completely. Certainly, I think that support and sympathy that has come from the EU and Britain and Ireland has really maintained the peace here. And in a sense, also, Brexit does not upset the fundamental dynamics or building blocks of peace here. So, for instance, the IRA has not been motivated to go back to violence. There's no reason that Brexit would cause that, or cause a widespread disruption. I just think that Brexit is negative in terms of stability of people's identities, and it may upset things further in the future in ways we can't predict as people's identities shift. And then the third question is really about lessons for Korea from Northern Ireland. What does the Northern Irish peace process offer Korea? That's a great question. I'm always a little bit afraid of that question because I don't ever want to suggest lessons for Korea or anywhere else, because all peace processes are different, all contexts are different. Having said that, we have welcomed many Korean groups to Northern Ireland who have come to try and understand the peace process here and see if there are any insights which are useful for Korea. I think there are some areas of interest. There might be some policy lessons, and I just noted down a few here. For example, the way that the Irish state revised its constitution. So it removed its territorial claim on Northern Ireland as part of the peace process. And that was a territorial claim which was hated by Unionists. And so that was a big concession by the Republic of Ireland. And I think that did have a beneficial effect. Secondly, power sharing might be of interest, the way the power sharing has worked. Perhaps that might be something that is used in Korea at some future point, although Northern Ireland would also show how difficult sharing power is. Thirdly, I think a big success of the peace process was the use of independent international commissions. So several commissions were set up to deal with particularly difficult and controversial issues, which the local political parties could not deal with themselves. Issues like disarmament, policing reform especially, those were the two big ones. And these independent international people came in and made recommendations. And in a sense, they took the difficult issues away from the local parties. And then fourthly, obviously, Korea would find it very interesting how Ireland has transformed its border. The border is now invisible. It's still technically there. It's still an international border between the UK and Ireland, and now the UK and the EU. But the removal of hard infrastructure and the freedom of movement across the border has really transformed the lives of people in Ireland, allowed ease of movement for education, for recreation, for holidays, for business, for everything. And it's particularly transformed the lives of people who live in the border areas as well. So those policy areas might be of interest to Korea. More generally, there might be an analogy of use for Korea from Northern Ireland, and that is the idea of a peace process as a very gradual process, a process in which neither side defeats or absorbs the other, but actually both sides recognize each other and work together over a long period of time to improve relations gradually rather than in the short term. And improve relations, especially through practical cooperation, practical cross-border activity, which is mutually beneficial. I think that's the core of the Irish case. And also, I think Northern Ireland might be a useful place for Koreans just to come and visit and to study, a place where they can meet many people who live who work in similar areas, people who have the same types of issues. There's a difficult history here. There's a legacy of hurt, trauma, grievance. There is a present of division, which we are trying to deal with. And so all of those issues around how different people with a difficult past live together, that might be of interest to Korea. And certainly many Koreans I've met in Northern Ireland seem to find it very interesting and enlightening to come here and meet people and see that there's another society on the other side of the world which does have many similar issues. So I hope that answers those questions to some extent. They're great questions. It's been great to be part of this event, and I hope the rest of the event goes really well. Thank you very much.